Welcome, everybody. How's it going? Trying to make sure I don't get too startled for y'all. Welcome to this week's Griscom stream. Hope you're doing well. I know I missed it last week, but definitely check out the conversation I did with Ben Burgess on his call-in show. I think that's all public now. Really enjoyed that. It could be something fun for us to check out in the future too. And tomorrow we got our friends Jason and Pascal joining us from This is Revolution on this week's Left Reckoning show. So definitely be looking forward to that. We got a hell of a lot more coming for y'all. And just one more thing to pitch too. If you missed it, over the weekend, we released a conversation on the politics of nostalgia, the past, and the future with Aaron from the Trillbillies. You can find him on Twitter at Paradoomer. Really, really fun conversation. So definitely hope that y'all check that out. A few more things down the pipeline. I was thinking for some of our higher tier supporters on Patreon too, we might try to do a kind of Zoom happy hour or something like that to catch up with folks. But I'll send out more information to people who are at our Waylon, Willie, and the and the guys and girls tier. We might be doing something for y'all very soon. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot to get to, and I saw some people already put some questions in the chat, which I very much appreciate. So I was just going to get started, if that sounds good to y'all. And Cameron asked this question about Patreon. Is anyone else being charged for not rewinding the streams that they're watching them? I don't know if that's a joke or something, but if you are having a problem, obviously feel free to reach out to us. Common Sense Skeptic, how's it going? This is a while back. You did a segment on our episode, Read the Vegas Loop. Just want to say thanks and was wondering what Musk related episodes you've got coming up. Hell yeah, and it's good to hear from you. Glad that you're tuning in. I don't know if we have too much coming up on Musk. We might want to do something. I've been kicking around maybe doing something on what Musk is doing in South Texas. We've done a bunch of episodes on that in the past. But it's quite frightening to see the way that Musk is sort of, ignoring the local authorities there and is sort of, strong arming the small community in South Texas. We've done stuff. If you, I don't know if you're interested in this kind of thing, but we had Bob Leibel on the show recently, who's running for Travis County for one of the seats on the Travis County Commission here to talk about Tesla's deal, which frankly, is just criminal. The amount of tax breaks that he got from both school districts and from the county to move the Cybertruck facility here. So, those are some of the more recent things. But it's always good to hear from you. Always feel free to reach out to DM or email or something like that too if you have anything in mind. Slice Keeper talking about NFTs. They said you mentioned NFTs creating scarcity where there doesn't need to be any is the real sin about NFTs and crypto. Can you explain? I think I'm misunderstanding you. Well, what we mean by that is that there is there is not a physical limit. For example, on like just talking about something simple like the JPEGs, right? The Bored Ape kind of thing, right? There is actually no physical limitation to that, really. Like there would be if something had to be actually produced in the physical world. And trying to create ways, like this is what NFTs effectively are trying to do, trying to create ways to own and control digital content or something that there isn't a kind of scarcity on, in the sense of like there's only so many of these things, right? Only like one person could possess it, or it can only be in one physical space at a time, right? The internet and digital content is supposed to be operating in a different way, because it doesn't have those same kind of restrictions. That one of the real sins of like a lot of this Web3 stuff is actually enclosing this kind of digital commons that exists or could potentially exist. Within like the kind of parameters of space and time, and that's just one of the really cruel and nasty things about. Like there's a scam aspect to it too, but there's also like not just the implication, like the intention here, right, is to create scarcity where there isn't scarcity, and I think that that's a real shame, and I think it's something that we should really, really be resisted and thought of as just as much of a problem as the fact that they're scamming people of money, and the fact that it's all bogus. Is that the end case goal is to sort of be having people being able to own and set up little fiefdoms. on things that could potentially be enjoyed by all, right? And that's like, and beyond anything, it's like this kind of trend and this desire that I think we should be very, very wary of. Um, MDR says, can you do an episode discussing the most prominent non-Marxist critics of capital and where their theories ended up today? Thanks. That could be an interesting kind of like intellectual history, or do you mean contemporary? I mean, there's plenty of obviously like, liberal criticisms of capitalism all the way from, Keynes, to Minsky, who's sort of in and out of socialism and Marxism and their kind of understanding of political economy. But yeah, I think that could be potentially interesting. It's always good to hear from you. Um, the new vehicle is doing good, Eric. Thank you very much. Um, Billy Big Bricks is still pretty upset about what I said about um, Jesus Christ, what's it called? Hearts of Iron the other day. Um, oh shit! I mean, Jesus Christ! I'm sorry. Back to Musk. I forgot all about the cases against him. For people who didn't see, I'm sure most people saw. He's being sued on two different levels. One for just torturing animals with his very very speculative Neuralink program, which is again very very frightening. And I'm sorry. I think that some people have made the point. Um, that if there weren't the kind of restrictions on him, there'd be no doubt that he would be interested in seeing this sort of more widely tested on people. It's an interesting thought and a scary one. And the other one is for big time racism in his companies, that they were basically segregating black employees and referring to them via slurs. They basically were segregating black employees into certain sections of his facilities. This is what's in the suit, and calling it the plantation. So I don't know. I mean, it's really nasty stuff. And yeah, I mean, this has not been a good week for him. We'll be covering that as it goes down the line. Um, Common Sense Skeptic says they'll have an episode out in the next 24 hours that tears down the presentation from last week. Well, that people should check that out. All right. So I'll say a couple things on this. Hey, David, I know this has been a big topic of late, but do you have any thoughts on this freedom convoy that's going on in my city of Ottawa? As always, hook 'em. Hell yeah, man. And keep up the great work. I mean, I'll just say up front, I'm not a supporter of the protests. I don't find that to be a very very material demand that we've been seeing. I think that it's also very correct to point out the fact that a lot of the people who are organizing it behind it are not only right wing, right? They're anti-worker. People who have opposed unions and the workers' movements in the past, right? I think all that's very very fair to say. I think it's very very clear that the right wing is having a lot of success right now, sort of tapping into some kind of popular, anger about things, and I think a lot of that is extremely misplaced. So again, I'm not a supporter. I think the people on the left who think that this is like the kind of one and true, genuine voice of like the working class are delusional. I think that some of the points that like a lot of the folks who are showing up are sort of painting themselves in the colors of being workers. That being said, I think that two really negative things that have come out of it on our side has been this kind of like class detective thing, where you're getting people who are acting like folks who might own their own rig are somehow like big capitalists. I think that that's a really delusional take. And I think what we're seeing right now from the Canadian government freezing people's bank accounts, I think is very very frightening and worrying development. I can understand people sort of wanting this action to be over with. But Lord in heaven, I think that it's an absolutely disastrous position to take, to sit here and say that you want to support the extension of state powers to to deny people essentially their right to to protest. Right? It could be completely absurd, and I'm sorry. Everything that I've seen from it has shown that it's not only not the kind of popular representation of like the vast majority of the will of like truckers, primarily because of the fact that the largest issues that people who drive for a living are facing right now is the increased personal responsibility that they're being sort of this being foisted upon them by companies who are sort of less willing to take care of them. For example, if there's an accident or anything like that, companies are really moving away from protecting truckers whenever any kind of like legal situation or accident or something like that arises. Extremely low wages and overwork, right? Like these aren't things that are very much represented in this movement. Instead, it's very much solely about vaccines and masks and all of that. And I think that shows very clearly that this is not a movement that is sort of speaking for the working class as a whole. But I think that it's delusional to also not realize that the working class in both the United States and Canada is extremely fragmented. And the question you should be asking yourself as the left, um, should be, okay, well, why are people resonating with movements that are clearly right wing and anti worker? And what can we do to sort of rectify that and to make our vision of the future and our movements much more palatable to them, to make it seem like these movements are much more viable to provide a better future, more security for yourself and your family and your community, right? Like that's what the kind of questions that you should be asking yourself. Instead, what we've got from the left is this kind of bizarre detective job where people will sit here and say like, oh, well, somebody was able to get financing on a $90,000 vehicle. They must be in the ruling class or the upper middle class. That shit is absolutely delusional, and I'll tell you that right now. That banks are very, very happy to capture people into long-term cycles of debt. So I don't know. I think that like for me again, it's not been a movement that I found to be very reflective of working class desire, or even as a whole. Particularly, it's not been very reflective of like the trucking movement in general. As people know, the taglines now, the vast majority of truckers are vaccinated. But I think like the lessons to be learned here for the left is to say, okay, well, why are some of the people who are working class who are there attracted to this kind of thing? What does that mean? And I was saying this to Ben Burgess the other day. It's like, well, in the absence of, very serious federal or government policy in the sense of like paying people and taking care of people when it comes to, mandates and dealing with the coronavirus, I'm sorry, it's very, very easy to understand how some people have got sort of wrapped up in this anti-mandate, anti-mask movement when the government has so clearly failed. And instead of having this, putting the responsibility of this pandemic, which is a collective problem, on the collective, on our joint institutions, the responsibility has become completely individual. So again, I'm not saying that I agree with that logic or reasoning, but it's just like understanding, okay, well, why are people thinking the way that they are? But secondly, I mean, I can't imagine what it's been like in Ottawa. I mean, this has gone on a lot longer and has been more coordinated than I think most people had expected. So I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts on it. But those are my top lines, and I think beyond anything, people should not be cheering on the Canadian or the American government using kind of brutal tactics like freezing people's bank accounts, or frankly even sending people calling for military escalation. That's something that you should just not want to see, because if they're going to do it to movements that a lot of people in the military, a lot of the people in the state apparatus are somewhat fond of or open to, imagine what's going to happen. 'Cause imagine what's going to happen in the future, because obviously the government is already very happy to crack skulls. The government is already very happy to attack the finances of left wing organizations. The government is already very happy to overcharge people for civil protest, right? And do you think if the government sort of normalizing that across the board is going to be a better solution or a better situation for the left? I think that's absolutely delusional. And people should be a lot more careful about that, I think, than they have been. All right, I'm coming down the line here. Um, Dakota asks me a question. Could you expand a bit on what you mean by political education? I think of teaching theory slash structural critiques of society, as well as practical stuff like how to set up and run meetings. Others, absolutely. I mean, political education is It's twofold, right? Because there's your personal theoretical education. That's you reading books on your own, and trying to learn about the world and history and theory and politics on your own. And then there's doing it in a collective, right? And that's where political education becomes something that's much more than just an education project, but a socialist movement, project, right? Because when you're sitting there in your organization and in your collective, arguing about ideas, working through problems, helping each other understand things. You're not only improving everybody in the organization as members, as thinkers, as socialists. You're also building up a kind of collective consciousness within your organization on these questions, right? Which prepares us for moments when these things bubble up to the top. You're seeing this throughout organizations, particularly the DSA right now. On a whole host of subjects, but most notably on Palestine lately, because I do think there's been a tremendous shift within the organization and being pretty extremely pro-Palestine. I mean that as a positive thing, right? But for a long time, people who had been members of the organization without really having to interact or engage with those ideas, and that's changing right now. And like across the board, it's like you never know what kind of political questions are going to sort of bubble up to the top of your organization, and just having done that kind of political groundwork, that's extremely helpful. I mean, I make this point a lot when I talk about political education, with Fred Hampton, where he's talking about he's talking about a community bank, right? Like a publicly owned bank, as a part of the Black Panthers program, and he's very upset because people have not the proposal that was given to him did not have a political education section on it, right? It was all just about how to set it up and what and whatnot, right? And Fred Hampton makes the point that the problem with this, if people don't understand why we're doing it, they're very very likely to abuse it, because it can just be a kind of like foreign system to them, right? There's something that, oh well, look, there's money, I can grab money from this organization or stealing from it, instead of recognizing like, no, this is all of us putting money together so that we don't have to deal with an extremely racist, which it was at the time, not that it's really changed too much today, an extremely racist like financial system that is going to charge you, absurd rates or not loan money to you at all. Okay, instead now the community owns this, so this is ours, right? And it's to all of our benefit to make sure that it's healthy and that nobody's stealing from it or creating problems, right? Like this is why political education becomes really, really important in the future, right? Not just in the immediate present, but also in the future, so that we have understandings of not just like what we're doing in the sense of like we're taking orders, but why we're doing it. And I think that a lot of things that we're seeing in the contemporary left right now, we have like these tensions because there is, we haven't been able to build up the capacity to do the political education on a mass scale that we need to do, right? This isn't a dig at anybody. It's it's hard to rise up and create organizations as quickly as we've been trying to. But that's sort of like that's the point in the importance of political education. I did a long video on Jackman for it. If you haven't seen it, I highly suggest checking it out. It's called "Political Education is for Everybody." We'll go a little bit deeper into that. Um, yeah. I mean, there's no doubt that the demands there aren't particularly radical. So that, I mean, that's why I'm saying that I don't support the movement. I think though that um, you know working through what's going on instead of just reacting to it because you're like against the demands, I think is an important thing if we're trying to build these kind of movements, because this stuff is immediately, COVID has immediately become something that has been owned by like the traditional parties of the left, right? The Democrats and the Liberal Party in Canada, and the GOP and the Conservative Party, right? Like they've sat themselves on those two opposite camps and have basically created a pretty distracting culture war around this. And like our project is something very very different, not just sort of lining up behind the Democratic Party or the Liberal Party, but rather trying to chart a very new path, and building working class movements and understanding what's going on with people. I think is very very important to do. Um, Joyce says, "What happened to the ranked choice voting movement? Is that still a thing?" I mean, I think some people have. I mean, there's certainly a lot of mobilization, particularly in the Northeast, on ranked choice voting. So I wouldn't say that it's gone away. I do think that it's incorrect to think that that in and of itself is going to fix our problems. Democracy reform in and of its like we are the reason we are in the position that we are in is not solely just because of money in politics or obscure voting systems. I think it would be absolutely preferable to improve them, um, but this kind of idea that's going to be a panacea, I think, was a big. Uh, it was a weird development that happened after 2016 in particular, because ranked choice, for example, is very, very confusing for folks. I'll say I've never voted in an area that uses ranked choice voting, but a lot of people aren't very familiar with it, and it can it can end up creating problems of its own right too. But I'm not taking a strong position on it, just noting that, like, the kind of idea that, like, oh, the one thing that's standing between us and, a more progressive or socialist government is ranked choice voting, I think would be a mistake. Um, all right, here we go. I think we're getting back to some of the stuff we were talking about earlier with the trucking protest, but I'll try to keep going through it. I think this is about the issues that truckers are facing both in the U.S. and Canada: surveillance pay not being worked till they pass out, wage theft, real issues. A lot of truckers are South Asian descent and have issues with discrimination along those other issues. Yeah, I mean, this is why the major unions have come out against it. This is why even the Communist Party's come out against it in Canada. Um, yeah, I don't think that those are wrong things to point out. Um, I'm sorry, Garrett. Maybe if you ask it again later, I can answer it, but I'm not sure exactly what you're speaking to. Um, okay, I am following down. Yeah, I think so too. There's a middle ground between calling for the RCMP military to send in the APVs and swat it out goons like they do with indigenous land back protesters. I think that's exactly the point, right? Like what's been really frustrating to me about this is that people bring up, what's happened with like the Wet'suwet'en people, and how the RCMP has just been absolutely brutal. I mean, I believe too that they set a state of emergency, to be able to pull back, the rights on, again, unceded land. Um, there, and like was like, well, now everyone else is getting a taste of it. It's like that's not a good thing, right? You should want to curtail the state, ability or capacity, or even confidence, in the acceptance of the vast majority of public for them to take these kind of coercive measures against people, right? Like that's just like 101. Because I'm telling you, the first people it's going to come back at is labor movements, is indigenous people, is social movements, civil rights movements, right? Just be very, very careful to sit here and if you think that calling for state violence is a solution to your political disputes with people is a huge mistake. um Sean McCallum says, thoughts on Adolph Reed's new book. I've not read it yet. I've only read the chapter that was published in Harper's, which I thought was very good and interesting. I'm very much looking forward to reading it, and maybe we could even get him on Left Reckoning to talk about it. Um, okay, so Dakota says that they get the. I mean, not to toot my own horn, but the video I did with Kale Brooks at Jacobin on why political education is for everybody is probably one of my favorite ones that I've done. Um, Kept coming down. Okay, I don't know what's going on. What you're talking about with Richard Wolff? Okay, I'm scrolling down so I can catch up with everybody. Yeah, I'll tell you that's been another thing that's been super disappointing too is the seeing. I highly suggest people watch our conversation we did with Mike Prisoner last week about Ukraine and the U.S., especially regarding the most recent news. It's been very very disappointing, I must say, to see so many people on the left really get caught up in this kind of propaganda that's been put out by the U.S. government that an invasion is imminent. And we're 5 minutes to midnight. That seems to have not been the case. In fact, the Ukrainian government was pleading with the U.S. government to stop doing this. The U.S. media misreported a statement that came out from the Ukrainian government. They were saying that basically, you know, irony. They're making a joke about how the Americans in the United Kingdom were sort of saying that like an invasion was imminent. Um, the government called for like a day of solidarity, and then the U.S. media reported that as if the the government was saying that they thought that this invasion was going to happen, which was not the case. I mean, it's been really really frightening, I must say, to see the way that the media sort of run with the story despite all of the contradictory evidence on the ground, and from other countries' media. And I think that talking about political education, I think reminding people as to why we on the socialist left don't support imperialist war or imperial games. I think we really need to revisit that because these kind of imperial war games, they don't help out the working people of Russia, they don't help out the working people of Ukraine, and they don't help out the working people of the United States. And the only position to take on them is opposition to escalation. Because what comes out of them is death and destruction for working people. It's working class people who get sent to the front lines to die for the bank accounts of the rich and powerful. This is just old tradition, and a great one, and one of the most proud traditions you can be a part of is the great left socialist tradition of being anti-war. And I think some people really need to revisit that. Because I don't know, like a lot of people, they think politics is about like trying to divine how you should feel about things, not think about things, how you should feel about things. Um, and I think that that's a very, very unhelpful tendency. And and you really saw it with this Ukraine Russia stuff lately. So I guess there's a guy just sort of trolling about Richard Wolff. I don't understand what you're going on about, um, but I see you and I hear you. Well, Rob, I'm going to say this like this, and I don't mean to single you out, but Rob says that political education could have as much of an effect in pulling people left as reactionary media had in pulling people right. That would be pretty great. This is the kind of thing is that like political education is not just like the good kind of education or the good kind of content or the things that we agree with. Political education is a collective process that we're doing together, right? And um, what does that mean? That means actually being a part of an organization and getting organized as a movement, which is something that we on our side have completely failed to do post Bernie. And you're seeing this in the kind of fragmentation amongst the left, right? Um, is all of these people are looking like, well, who's the guy who channels my feelings the best? Who's the guy who's going to get angry about the things that I'm angry about and dismiss the things that I don't care about, right? And this very, very unhealthy and unhelpful. It's very good if you want to sort of just create a bunch of like, you know, small markets for content creators. But it's a very, very bad way to build a movement. Political education is something that we're doing as a collective in an organization within a structure, not just with a kind of loose affiliation of like, oh, we're progressive, right? I'm talking about being in an organization like Socialist Alternative or DSA, right? And reading together and debating together and thinking together and educating ourselves about what we're doing and why we're doing it. And it is an absolutely critical process because it's the first thing that gets taken away when people in power You see this in left movements or even just political movements across the board, when they start to sort of ossify, the kind of radicalism and democratic structures of political movements. I mean, um, Leo Panich has a very good line about what happened at the end of the Soviet Union, was that the people had been made into fools, right? It's not that the people were fools, it's that they had been made into fools. That all of the structures of the political system, particularly political education, had been set up to try to mystify and to stop any kind of bottom up, movement. While the Bolshevik Revolution, the Soviet Revolution, certainly was a workers' revolution through and through, under the threat of insurrection, and invasion, and you know, infiltration from foreign powers, and there certainly were a lot of attempts to do this. What ends up happening in the Soviet Union is that the state becomes ossified, right? Rather than being something that's being built together with working people, and the government, it became something where the Communist Party just sort of sits and maintains itself and its structures in a very, very harsh way, because they were worried that any of the kind of openness that happens, when you do really open up questions and political participation to the masses, it could lead to instability that could be taken advantage of by the opponents of the revolution. And the problem with that is that as much good policy as you're trying to create, right? Even if you are just like the smartest and the truest, movement leader, if you aren't able, to sort of be embedded in a part of the masses, you're not going to be able to complete that kind of transition, from a pre-capitalist to capitalist to socialist to communist state, right? And that's one of the real tragedies of the Soviet Union, right? So this political education, political participation, being open to people, politics being a space where people are able to, engage in and work collectively, is something that, we should take very, very seriously, the project and the kind of task in front of us of building the capacity to be able to do that. Um, all right, let's see. Sean, if you want to make a point, I'll definitely respond to it, but it just seems like it's just been, a little bit of constant trolling. Um, hmm. All right. Well, I'll keep looking for questions, but let's, because we've been talking about sort of sour things. Let's talk about something that's fun. Uh, a victory, for our comrade Evo Morales. I don't know if y'all saw this. The right wing and the former members of the coup government have tried to bring up, charges against Morales, to the ICC. Um, and luckily, they were not successful. This is from Kwashiwan News. The ICC throws out claims against Evo Morales. The ICC, the International Criminal Court, today rejected a petition filed by the former Anez regime to investigate Evo Morales and other union leaders, claiming that the general strike against the coup government in August 2020 constituted crimes against humanity. The U.S. backed Anez dictatorship asked the ICC in September 2020 to investigate the general strike, claiming that it caused COVID deaths as the country was paralyzed by social movements calling for the return of democracy. The petition was specifically against Evo Morales, who was in Argentina, COB labor leader Juan Carlos, Harachi, and Campesino leader Leonardo Loza. Um, ICC Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan said he would not open a formal investigation as the alleged acts were not within the jurisdiction of the court. Um, a good a good reminder of like what we're up against, and just endlessly happy, for Evo Morales and the people of Bolivia as they're able to chart their own path. despite the American-backed coup, and the right wing continuing to try to use international pressure to attack as many folks as possible. Um, all right. I've not seen. What is this? Have you seen? Have you seen Tulsi's video about Hillary Clinton dropped early this morning? I have not seen Tulsi. I don't know where you find Tulsi stuff. Um, I have to say, I'm not particularly too interested in Tulsi Gabbard. Um, but maybe I can be proved wrong here. All right. Well, unless I'm happy to take a couple more questions, but unless anyone has anything, I might run in a second. Um, I've not. Okay, so Sean. So I saw that Richard Wolff said some stuff about the trucker protest with Jimmy Dore. I don't know about what happened in there. I don't watch the Jimmy Dore show, so I can't say much about it. Richard Wolff is somebody who we've interviewed on the show, is somebody who I consider to be a friend. Um, I have not seen his arguments here. I would probably disagree with him if he was saying that this was a workers' movement, though. I guess I don't know what you're worked up about, in the sense that I'm someone who's pushing back against all these people on the left who want to see this thing being broken violently. Um, but I can't sit here and say that anti-vaccine mandate protests are sort of the first and foremost concern of working class people. That doesn't mean I'm dismissing folks. I literally have been sitting here the whole time saying that what we need to do on the left is understand where people are coming from and why that avenue or that demand is rising up to some segments of the population. What I'm not going to do, though, and what a lot of these kind of scam artists do, is see anybody make a demand and act as if that represents the entirety or the whole of an entire movement, of an entire group of people. In fact, the largest group of people globally, right? And that is working class people. The point here, the point about working class politics and why socialists, we believe in working class politics, is that it has the potential to overcome and supersede all of the different kind of identitarian concerns that we have, all of the different kind of fragmentations that we have as a class, because there is a common interest there. So in that interest, I'm very interested, in trying to understand and hear and recognize why people feel and react the way that they do. But I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, you see, this guy supports this, so that means that this entire movement represents the way, like the way forward, and we're going to take marching orders from this person, because they work for a living. I mean, that's what we all do, right? I'm not familiar. I have not watched the Richard Wolff thing on this, so I can't respond to his arguments, on it. But I will just say that there's a lot of people, who have sort of made a career for themselves now, out of taking kind of extremist positions that aren't reflective of the vast majority of people, and acting as if everyone else has gone crazy, and is refusing to listen to folks, right? I think taking this kind of cherry picked information and view of the world is very, very unhelpful for a movement. And frankly, I don't find people like Jimmy Dore to be somebody who is very, very invested in the success of any kind of working class movement. I've seen some of his work. Obviously, I've known about him for years. I mean, I think that this person is very, very much, a contrarian to the fullest extent, and was just going to go whatever way the tide takes him, especially if he can be the only person holding on to a position, right? Like, I didn't think, for example, that Donald Trump and that movement represented the future of working class politics, or was even a pro working class movement. Were there people in the working class who voted for Donald Trump and supported him? Yes. Do I think that was the vast majority of the working class? No. But what I do as a Marxist is say, okay, why do people find that to be their interest, right? Why do people vote and express their politics that way? Why are people much more. Why do people find that to be a vehicle for them to better their lives instead of our socialist movement? Right? I absolutely investigate that question. We do that the vast majority of the time on the show Left Reckoning. But I'm just not going to be sort of sit around and be stupefied when I see two people of the same class having different opinions. Because guess what? The working class is extremely fragmented. And it's fragmented by design and by choice, right? And it's fragmented, yes, because we have not built a working class movement that is able to sort of bring in all of the different and disparate parts of that population in this country and globally, right? And I want to work on that project of building it. Um, but just sort of following around blindly or wildly any kind of group with no real analysis other than, oh well, this seems to be countercultural, this seems to be anti-establishment. That's a fool's errand. That's what demagogues do, and that is will bring us no closer to weakening the power of the bosses or capitalists, right? And I'm very, very worried about political movements or social movements that seem to be funded and run by anti-worker, anti-union, rich people, right? I don't know. I don't know why that's so difficult for some folks, to wrestle with. And somebody else is saying this. Fisher says, "Why does David insist we all vote Dem still?" I don't. Why did Griscom defend AOC after her terrible votes, including the Iron Dome? No, you can watch plenty of videos. David Griscom, Left Reckoning. This when she voted the way that she did on Iron Dome. We did like 5 videos condemning her, explaining why this is a problem and trying to find ways out of this hole. Right? What these kind of criticisms or these arguments that are coming from people fundamentally get down to. Saying, "Oh, you support the Democratic Party, or you think that it's good that AOC again." And she voted present regarding the Iron Dome funding, right? Which again was terrible. And again, we did like a lot of content and a lot of videos talking about why that was a problem, right? But what this kind of movement of folks, who get really fixated on AOC and even the Democratic Party, the trap that they fall into. Um, is thinking that we are in the situation that we are in because enough people haven't opted out of the system. No, the reason we're in the situation that we're in is because we are functionally fragmented and disorganized all across the country. And if we want a constituency and a movement that is powerful enough to get our demands met, we have to build it. And we need to find ways to build that. And that does not mean sitting around and blindly following, for example, popular politicians of the left. No, it means building our movements that can stand independent of them. Natalie Shure has a really great piece in Jacobin that just came out called "The End of the AOC Honeymoon" that I think really lines out this argument well. Right? It's post Bernie Sanders, and there was this hope within organizations like DSA that by using kind of star power, politics, we could invigorate the movement, bring in more people, and increase people's awareness of our arguments for things like Green New Deal, Medicare for all, and etc. And there can be no doubt that that did happen. The problem is that because we don't have a party structure, right? Because we're running, for example, in the Democratic Party, and just the reality of the fact that the DSA, even though it's a growing and one of the largest socialist movements in the country, it's still relatively weak when you compare it to the American population, right? And even in the districts where we're electing people within DSA, Jamal Bowman is a great example of this. The DSA was a very, very small portion of the coalition that was able to bring him into power in the first place, right? So we get people into power, and they a lot of them want to work with the DSA on some things, but they're not beholden to them, right? Um, and we need to be focusing on building up our capacity in those communities and communities across the country to organize ourselves as voters and as a movement, so that we can get our demands met, right? Again, I thought that what ended up happening with Bowman, I think the decision to not endorse him in the future is absolutely correct. I think that this is a distinction that needs to be made within these organizations, between people who sort of say that they represent this organization, in Congress, but then basically don't follow our principles, right? I think that working through that is absolutely an important thing, to be doing. But Natalie makes a good point that when in the piece is that before the vote, right, before Bowman basically turned their back on the BDS struggle and the pro-Palestine struggle, and a lot of the anti-imperialist wing of DSA, he was inundated with calls from people in his district, wanting him to make certain votes that were pro-Israel, right? And they weren't receiving votes. I'm sorry, they weren't receiving calls from their constituents about Palestine, right? And again, that doesn't excuse Bowman for standing with an apartheid state, but it does. It should shine light to you if you're serious about changing things, if you're serious about building power, right? That should shed some light to you about the fact that we need to build our capacity to make our groups, more necessary and more critical to people in power. And the way to do that is by organizing and expanding our membership, by sharpening ourselves through things like political education, saying like, no, we're not, we can be, a fairly big tent, but there are some lines that we're not going to cross, and being explicit about those. And we're seeing those growing pains develop right now. But this kind of like, oh, well, I'm going to opt out, and I'm going to vote for, an extremely marginal candidate, and that's how I'm going to do politics, right? Good luck with that and have fun. But that's not how you build power. If you believe in working class, in the working class and working class power, your fixation should not be on yourself as an individual, right? As like, well, I did the good thing and those shit libs did the bad thing, right? Your fixation should be, how do we expand our movement and our ranks so that we can truly represent a united working class movement instead of a small fragment of it. And what's very frustrating about a lot of these kind of critics is that if they were, for example, to be within these movements, um, and actually advocating and fighting for these things in a material way, not in a kind of symbolic way, then I would have a lot more patience for them. But over the weekend, I was at a really great rally for the Green New Deal here. And we were developing. The rally was set up in a really great way, which was doing something that desperately needs to be done on the left environmentalist movement, right? Which is getting people who are very, very passionate about the environment and and the Green New Deal and things like that to take very, very seriously the labor component, and in fact to recognize that we will get nowhere without labor power. Right. And in Texas, that really matters. And that means working with people who are in the fossil fuel industry. Right. And that was a really important rally, and it was a great thing to be a part of. And it gets disrupted towards the end because somebody wanted to come at AOC for her despicable votes on the Iron Dome. Right. And AOC gave a very, very bad response to that too, frankly. But what was frustrating to me about it, it's not necessarily that AOC is being questioned on her bad votes on Palestine, but the recognition that, one, disrupting this Green New Deal rally was not going to bring us any closer to one. Doing anything significant on Palestine, nor getting us closer to building the coalitions that are necessary for the Green New Deal. But also that within these organizations, within Austin DSA, there has been a very, very laudable, recent history of dealing with the Palestine question, where they essentially de-endorsed Greg Kassar, who was really great and is somebody who I think if you live, in his district, should absolutely vote for. But he broke from our line on Palestine, and for that was his endorsement was pulled back, right? And I think that is exactly the way to start to build those kind of principles that we want, right? But did the people who were, wanting to disrupt and make, kind of cheap points about the DSA in Palestine aware of that or interested in that or want to see anything like that happen? Absolutely not. It was a way for them to say, I did the good thing and I'm on the right side, right? When instead movements are extremely complex, and you can have principles, and we can challenge organizations, especially organizations that you're a member of, when they're failing to do it. But if you're not like really materially involved in these struggles, you're not fighting for Palestinians, right? It's very self-serving. And you see people going, oh, well, I'm going to do a bunch of media spots about this to a bunch of other people who are unorganized and aren't, deeply rooted into the Palestinian liberation struggle, right? Is that fighting for Palestinians? No, that is a way for you to say, I did my politics today. I expressed myself today, right? And if people really needed to get past this idea that politics is just purely a space about self-expression, politics is a game about power. And we need to win power by out organizing our opponents, by debating with each other, certainly, as much as is needed to hone our capacity to fight for justice around not just this country, but around the globe, right? But this kind of wrecker shit, I'm really done with it at this point, because you've seen the fragmentation post Bernie at this point, and it has not brought us any closer, to power. And there's blame, by the way, to be put across the spectrum. I think it'd be a big mistake to think that it's only these, kind of dramatic politics, this moral politics that some people want to hold up to. That again are like completely incoherent. Because you look at the stuff that Door's all on about. We've moved from Medicare for all to I don't know what the fuck's going on over there anymore. But I'm really, really, really done with this. Like, if you don't have a fundamental material analysis, if this is just a way for you to feel good about yourself and self-righteous, then frankly, like you're just not helping us get any closer to power to liberation. All right. So all David and DSA does is say that they're on the right side. No, what they do is we fight against a criminal justice system, that throws children in school, that evicts people from their homes. That's why I'm very, very happy to be supporting people like Andrew Hairston here, who is running for justice of the peace. Right? That's material power that will effectively change people's life in a positive way, and it's something that we can do as an organization because people have built and spent the time talking to their neighbors, building the capacity, building the relationships to be able to compete for those positions and potentially win, right? That's what people do, right? That's how you change people's lives. What a lot of these pretenders like to do is they like to sit on the sidelines, tell people don't join this organization because I don't like this one bit of it, right? And again, absolutely fine to say, hey, this position is lacking. DSA, for example, before this rapid influx of people, was an organization that took some horrendous positions on a lot of important questions. Like, look at DSA in the 90s and 2000s, like really rough stuff, right? But functionally, it's a different organization now. Why? Because people got involved, and it's an organization where people can vote and they can have influence on decisions and what the organization does, and it has put us in a better position today than we were 10, 15 years ago, than we were 30 years ago. And what we need to be doing right now is not saying, oh, we're going to do an opt-out movement, and we're going to continue to fragment ourselves even more, but say, how can we build our capacity to be even stronger than it is? How can we make our message clear? How can we avoid some of the mistakes that we've gotten into, right? Like, the point is not that there's no mistakes that have been made, but we want to put ourselves in a position where we can rectify those mistakes, where we can learn from our past and our history, instead of just sitting out and saying like, well, I was right and they were wrong. It's just endless loop of this shit. If you do it, and you can look at the American left and you can see from time to time people got together for a little bit of time, and then it completely broke out into internal civil war, and then very, 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 very little happened. Right? I would much rather be, engage in politics in a collective than as an individual. Right? This kind of neoliberal brain rot that politics is about you expressing yourself and your personal preferences versus being a part of a collective. Right? And dealing with, the nuance and the difficulty, by the way, that sometimes goes into being a collective. Because guess what? That's what socialism is. right? It's the recognition that you are a part of a community and finding ways to build the power of that community and make life better for the rest of us. I don't know. I shouldn't waste too much time on this just because I just don't think that there's there's much substance to a lot of these criticisms, right? It's frustrating to me because like you talk to people who are really engaged in organizing or in DSA politics, it's constant conversations about how to deal with the squad and how to deal with AOC and how to deal with this disconnect between the organization and some of the elected officials that we have in it, right? That's constant conversations. And these chuds out here who are unorganized, who are not part of movements, they fixate and think that they're the only person who has seen a contradiction before, right? All right, I gave you your due. I won't get caught up in doing this over and over and over. And obviously, like there's like significant difficulties. I mean, I'm much more of a position that we need to get closer and closer to building a political party. I think that is very unhelpful to be associated with the Democratic Party as a whole. I think that really does hurt our movement, but we need to find ways to build the capacity to be able to do something different if that's our intention, right? I mean, look at what's gone on with the People's Party. I mean, it's frankly imploded at this point. Um, I don't know, was it Virginia? Um, or like their steering committee, their leadership just had to resign because of the toxicity in the movement. Like that's been a really unhelpful development again because like I get why people are fed up and they want to look to do something different than what's been done before. But you have to be really careful and you have to understand that there are people who want to sell you cheap answers to complicated problems, right? If you think that we don't have Medicare for all right now because of the squad, because they didn't force the vote, you're extremely delusional. Um, if you wanted to see them do that to make you feel good, right, then I think you're thinking about politics in the wrong way, and you'll never be, frankly, happy, and you'll never get the things that you want if that's how you want to engage in politics. Doesn't mean we accept everything. Doesn't mean we accept cowardice. Like frankly, when you think about members of the squad and the DSA, I mean, and I hate even that terminology, the squad. The difficulty is that you ride these the popularity of these superstar politicians who are household names, and they become more powerful than the movement. And I think sort of reckoning with how we um, how we deal with that is an important question. But if you think that everybody's blind to that kind of reality and weren't making choices, because there's no doubt about it. Same thing with Bernie Sanders, right? um, Bernie Sanders completely changed, the game. He has especially on foreign policy positions that I think are bad, right? I also think that it's a shame that Bernie Sanders never took that popular movement and really organized it and got people to join an organization, right? That's a shame. But are we not living in a better place right now as a left in this country because of Bernie Sanders' two presidential runs? I think it would be absolutely delusional to argue that we're not in a stronger place than we were in 2014, right? Come on. And these are the tensions and the contradictions that we have to be able to dance with, right? Bernie Sanders ran in the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is an organization that time and time again has stood against American working class people, time and time again. And let's not even get started on what they've done to the international global working class, right? Um, but was it? Was it a platform that we were able to utilize to show people the contradictions? For example, that the Democratic Party does not represent the left. It does not represent interests like a higher minimum wage and and Medicare for all. Right? Not only do they not support that, they're actually hostile to it. Right? That was extremely beneficial for a lot of people's political education. I'll tell you right now. I bet a lot of people who are watching this right now were politicized in the way that they are now. We're drifting towards socialism in the way that they are right now because they saw and they recognize the fundamental tensions within the Democratic Party. Right, we are in a better position right now because of that decision. Right, would it? would we be better off had Bernie Sanders said, "Well, I'm not going to run in the Democratic Party because it's the it's the party of the petty bourgeois and the kind of urban PMC. I'm going to sit out, right? Or I'm going to run, on my own kind of movement." He wouldn't have gotten the popularity. He wouldn't have seemed to be as legitimate um, as he ended up seeming to some folks, right? See, that's wrong, right? But that's the facts. And if you want to be in politics, if you want to win, you need to start being more comfortable. Um, you need to be much, much more comfortable um, being able to dance with these contradictions. I don't know. How's it going, Mario? As a European, I'm very interested in your take on how far the U.S. and U.S. media will continue to hype the Ukraine conflict, even while things they're starting to cool down. Well, if anything, it's been a big pat on the back so far today that it was American aggression that ended up saving the day here, um, which is a very, very flawed analysis and frightening one. Um, so I mean, again, I don't know if you saw our interview with Mike last week, but it's been a lot needs to be done on the anti-war front within this within with the anti-war movement. Sorry. But I don't know, man. I mean, where are you at, Mario? I'd be curious because I think one of the things that I was noting is very funny. If you look at, German media or even French media, you could immediately start to see the big holes in the way that was being presented by the kind of established press in the U.S. Hey, David, have you seen Greg Saar in Austin? I know it's badly gerrymandered there. I'm not sure I mean, have I seen him like on a walk? Um, I mean, I talked about Greg just a while ago. I mean, the what happened with him in Palestine DSA, I think, is very sad. I think that the decisions that were made were the correct ones. I do think that he's one of the better and most progressive candidates that you could vote for in the state of Texas. Um, and I would highly suggest if you live in those districts to support him. I don't live in his district. I'm very sad. I don't live in any of the cool districts. Um, are actually very, very boring this election cycle for me. Hmm. All right. I'm pissed off today. Mm, I I'll just say this to Sean, who says, "Don't you consider the optics of standing in opposition to a movement that has successfully caused a partial shutdown of capital for an entire week? How it looks like defending the status quo." I don't criticize the movement for potentially um, interrupting capital. I critique the movement for thinking that vaccine mandates are the number one hurdle or you know problem for working class people. I think that's a delusional position. And I think that if you look at the structures of the protests, you can see that this is not something that has sort of been developed as a working class movement, but rather something that has been, frankly, run by a resurgent right wing, funded by the right wing, not to fight for working people, but to oppose them. And I think if you look at the labor, like I believe in workers' democracy, and what that means is listening to workers across the board, but at the end of the day, finding ways to act as a collective. And when the vast majority of truckers are saying something very different than a small proportion of them, I'm going to side with the majority. Not in any kind of way of saying I think the police should crack people's skulls, or I think that I started this whole segment or this whole show by talking about how I think it's absolutely frightening and should be opposed with every fiber of our being. Right? Um, what they're talking about doing is freezing people's bank accounts. Right? So yeah, that's the position. Optics. This is this kind of shit. Like, what is politics for you, man? Is it just like you want to look a certain way? I mean, it couldn't be me. It's just like I'm not interested in this. Like, in that in that version of politics. I'm interested in politics because I, as a working class person, know what's going on in my communities, right? And I'm seeing more and more people suffering. I'm seeing more and more people fall hungry. I'm seeing more and more people unable to stay in their homes and facing housing insecurity. I'm seeing more and more people facing down the threat of rampant police violence, right? And I'm involved in politics to build our power so that we can change and challenge those systems, not for optics. I mean, if that's what you're in it for, that's, your call, not me. Hmm. All right. Oh, it's good to see Rachel here. I hope that you're doing well, Rachel. I know it's been a little, probably not too fun, um, let alone at home, but just reading what's going on here. Good to hear from you. Um, Joyce says, "What do you see as the most realistic outcome from nitpicking the progressive members of Congress while the elephant in the room, the GOP, votes against everything in the world?" Well, I would disagree with that position. I don't think that it's nitpicking to challenge people who are members of our organization for not standing up for, in particular, human rights in Palestine. I don't think that's nitpicking at all. In fact, that's why we elected and why we knock on doors and campaign for these folks, right? Um, what I think is unhelpful is when people, one, don't recognize that there are internal processes that are going on to increase our capability and our capacity for dealing with these kind of national elected members. Two major cases when it comes to Palestine: DSA Austin, essentially unendorsing Greg Casar, and Jamal Bowman not going to be endorsed in the next election cycle, right? These are internal processes that are going on within that movement. What's frustrating to me is when people think that, like, oh, no one else recognizes these kind of contradictions, and it's, they say, like, well, that's why I sit at home and I don't participate in politics in my community or in a kind of organization, right? That's where I'm at with these kind of things. I mean, okay, but, like, I don't know. Like, I know people are nitpicking about what Sean is even saying here about shutting down capital, but beyond that, it's like, well, to what end, right? I don't think chaos in and of itself is necessarily a good thing, particularly when it's not being waged by working class movements, as we've established time and time again. There might be working people within it. Um, but I don't think that it's majority working class, or even if it was 40-60, when the vast majority of the class of people that you're supposedly speaking for are saying the exact opposite of you. I think that we should be able to sort of recognize there's very seriously an open debate instead of wholeheartedly selecting one side that is the minority, to be our avatars or tribunes. I think that that's a big mistake. I think I'm done with that, though. Rachel says, still alive and not in a war zone. I'm very, very happy to hear that. Um, all right, I'm coming back down to the live. Um, I mean, this is like, just going back to the shutting down Capitol. Like this, like, was like the general strike thing, when people were like, "We're going to do a general strike." It's like, great. Do you have the capacity to do these things? Right? Like, do you have the organization to do them? And then you're just talking. I don't know. Um, okay, I'm just reading through these quickly. I see you. I see you, Twitch chat. I'm trying to keep up. There's a lot of it. It's just me here. And I get worked up. I'm not able to follow everything. I see y'all just as much as YouTube. I have them all together. It's just I'm like, probably I'm 2 minutes behind right now. Um, Left-wing, do you support the Green Party for local level councils? What do you think of Emma's lower row of panels missing the colors? I don't know what Emma's lower row of panels missing the colors is. Um, not particularly, at least not recently. Um, you know, it frankly depends. Like, I'm not somebody, for example, who felt like it was our duty as the left to like browbeat people to vote for Biden or frankly Hillary. Um, I will say that like I don't find protest votes necessarily to be like doing politics. I don't condemn people who feel like that's what they want to do, but I think that's just like a very personal kind of like, you're just doing something. Um, I think like really, and I also think like this kind of fixation on just voting in and of itself as like where we do politics is a really really big problem. Like we need to be politicizing a lot more. Um, of society, and frankly, the voting booth is like probably one of the places where we are at our weakest, as a movement right now. So I'm much more interested in building our capacity in other ways. So like to go back to the Green Party, it's like no, I mean like the Green Party, like the Green Party one is functionally a mess. um, and you don't even have to go to recent examples. You can go to the 2000s, read Counterpunch on what was going on in the Green Party in the 2000s, right? And you'll see that that was a party structure that was also extremely, extremely messy. I think that it's even less helpful to have a kind of big tent like anti-establishment party, because you find with people who are anti-establishment that means a lot of very, very different things. If you could vote for a socialist party where you were at, that was third party, I would say do that. But the Green Party, I don't think represents, for example, socialists in general. Like there's socialists within the Green Party, but it's not a socialist party, um, you know, at large, right? So if you have the option, for example, to vote for something like Shamus Wan, like that's who I would be voting for. But I don't just throw around votes too much. I don't typically. I mean, I usually vote in elections. I usually don't feel the need to vote. For Democrats in safe like this is just like not like I don't think that there's any kind of way to unlock a better future at the ballot box in like this very specific like scenario that you're putting forward, right? It's like, oh, if like me and my five friends are voting for a Green Party for like super local elections, and the ruling party, which is the Democratic Party, for the vast majority of local seats in Austin, like I don't find that to necessarily mean too much, other than maybe just to me and my buds. So I don't know. Um, okay, I'm trying to get at least towards the bomb, make sure I'm not missing anything, but I'm probably going to be rolling in just a moment. It's very, very nice. I'll say that. Okay, Evil Yoda wants me to address Wolf. I have not seen Wolf's thing. I talked about it a little bit earlier in the stream. You can go back and see it. I haven't seen what Wolf said, um, so I can't speak to it. But I have a feeling, unfortunately, that I don't think I agree with him. Um, it's yeah. I mean, Rachel. I mean, it must be very wild to just hear the way that a lot of Americans have been talking about, and the way that our media has been pushing it. Um, Rachel, who's in Ukraine, says most people exist in a come what may sphere with the assumption that jack shit will actually come. Makes sense to me. Um, yeah, actually, that is a good point. I mean, I will say, the majority report fixation on like being against the Green Party, I've never found to be particularly interesting, or on the other side too. But Antonio says best anti-Green Party argument is cinema. Um, my point is like I don't get worked up about the Green Party. I don't think that that's a vehicle for getting us where we need to be. And I think also when you see people like cinema, you can sort of see a lot of the tensions within that organization. Well, I'm jealous of you, Mario says. It's moments like these when David tells us vote for a socialist party where we are that I feel glad to be German and have the choice between four socialist communist parties on the ballot. Wouldn't that be nice? Um, I have not spoken with Forrest about the mayor, the Green Party mayor of New Paltz. Sounds. I think I might have, well, like not publicly on a show or anything like that. I think I might have talked to Forrest about that, or he might have talked to me about it. That rings a bell, but um, sorry, I haven't put it on the screen for people to read. Yeah, I've never seen that to be a viable political movement. Um, all right, yeah, I mean, I think that that's pretty fair. In my opinion, and thanks for the super chat too. In my opinion, Blue Dog Democrats and their supporters are a bigger obstacle to economic progressives, more so than the GOP voting base. Do you agree? I mean, well, you're certainly seeing it with people like Manchin and Cinema, and very exciting that maybe Jessica Cisneros can finally defeat Cuellar. Um, and yeah, I mean, I no doubt about it. I mean, those people are just occupying space. Um, but recognize that we have class enemies across the board, um, and find ways to beat our enemies wherever they are. I think is the general strategy that we should be taking. Appreciate the question, Davis, but I'm not sure what you mean. What are your thoughts? Are your thoughts on seizing institutional power from a counter homogenous perspective? I'm sorry, I do not follow it, but appreciate the question. Um, yeah, I don't know what the Richard Wolf thing is. Well, I appreciate that, Sean. Sean says, "Thanks for the show. Your patience and time are appreciated. Excellent food for thought." Well, I am happy to hear that. Um, what's a blue dog dem now? I mean, Steve says, "What's a blue dog dem now?" Mansion, Quayle. I mean, there's plenty of. New York has a shitload of them, too. Just extremely conservative Democrats. Yeah, I don't give. Red Wizard says, "I don't care about hating the Greens because I have been around long enough to see them as problematic even under Nader." I don't know. I would have voted for Nader, I think, had I been voting back then. Um, okay. Man, a lot of stuff about the Jesuits and Rome. I can't follow that. I've never understood, and I can't read it all over live. um, all right. Are we saying this in Texas? Yeah, people remember if you're in Texas, it's primaries right now. A friend told me early voting yesterday was Republican by a 3-1 margin. I'm assuming your area. Hopefully, today brings better news. Um, yeah, I've also seen when Harris County they're challenging a shitload of ballots, which is very frightening. Um, thank you, Sean. Appreciate it. Um, okay, I'm just coming down to the bottom of this, and I think I got a roll, but I'll take these questions quickly. Um, Is that true about Laclau? Antonio says, "Thanks for clarifying about Laclau move. I found out Laclau was never on the left. He'd been a Peronist." Do you have? I mean, I'd be curious if you had a source for that. I have one of my teachers was actually a really good friend of Laclau, so I have some personal respect for him. But I didn't know about him being a Peronist. Um, do you think Beto has a puncher's chance in the election? I saw a poll that Texas is divided on the privilege grid. Um, we'll see. It depends. I mean, I'm not really too hot for Beto in the first place. I'll just say that. I think that he has a lot of desire to be a Democratic Party star, and if he wants to win, he should stay on message of fixing the grid, dealing with corruption in the state, and fighting for better wages for people. um, and not do a lot of culture war and gun stuff. But we will see. Um, Sucks to have not that I would ever vote or support Abbott, but it sucks sometimes to just sit around and watch Beto versus Abbott decide the future of a state of 35 million people. Um, yeah, I think it's good to have socialists in the in charge of public sector. David, Davos, sorry. Um, I haven't seen about the nurses strike in Australia, Mario. I should definitely we should definitely cover that. People should check that out. Let me know what you think. Yeah, Davos is like having socialists on school boards, socialist judges, etc. Yeah, watch the interview I did with Andrew Hairston. It's up right now. You can watch it. It's titled um, "A Better Justice System is Possible. We have to build it," or something along that nature. You can find it. It's like one of our most recent videos. He's running for justice of the peace here, which is the court that decides evictions and like truancy laws for young folks. So he's running against the school to prison pipeline here, and for a very much more humane and just housing system than one that throws hungry mothers out on the street because they're short on the rent. I think that's a very, very meaningful way for us to, one, use our power, as I was talking about earlier, in organizations like DSA, and two, um, make life better for people and to help them know that these are the people who are going to do it for you. Socialists, democratic socialists, are the people who are out looking out for you and looking out for the community, right? I think that's absolutely something we should be doing, and I'm happy to see people doing that. Um, well, I appreciate our friend Eat Vegetables saying thanks, and I appreciate you hanging out, and the advice is good advice. Um, well, I really do. I do really think I got to run in a second. But the thing that's wild about Abbott and Crenshaw is that they're all being challenged on the right, like by like the right, right now. So you think that Abbott is a far right, extremely dangerous governor. There is an even more like furious right wing movement out there demanding much, much, much more, which is a very frightening thought. So if there are any lines that Abbott can cross, they're much more to the right than anything about good governance. But of course, they will all, line up behind him when it comes time to vote. Um, Here we go. We got a question from Enrique. I think we met a little while ago, didn't we? At the at the DSA talk, maybe not. I'm pretty sure. Hey, David, I'll be giving a call your way later to talk about a possible demonstration from Houston DSA on the USW Exxon lockout in Beaumont. I would love, I can't wait to hear from you. And, people should definitely follow that and support the United Steelworkers there who have been on lockout for 10 months now in Beaumont. Because this is how we can really materially fight for working people and fight for things like Green New Deal at the same time. Um, I'm trying to get to the bottom of these chats because I know people have been asking. So I'm going to answer your question quickly, if that's okay, on mythology. What are your top three issues? I think the most immediate issues that we can be touching on right now for people is housing, healthcare, and wages. Right? There's a lot of other things that go under that. My personal things, I think, are almost immaterial. I think those are the ones that we can make the most headway in the most immediate sense, right? Because everybody in this country is facing housing insecurity. There's not a city in this country where people are not constantly talking about the affordability crisis, the increase in their rents, right? And it's something that directly touches on, the fundamental problems with capitalism, right? Which is commodifying things that we need to survive, right? So housing is one that I think we can do a lot on, and I think that's an immediate area that we can grow people's um, you know, support. Healthcare, that speaks for itself. Medicare for all completely changed the game, and made people think about politics in a different way. And again, as I was saying about the housing, it also, I think, having these two-prong approaches, right? Having bread and butter issues, but also ones that also have a critique of capitalism at the center of it is one of them. And third, um, I would say wages slash public power, maybe, if that's okay for me squeezing another one in there. Wages, again, similar. It's a class fight. Understanding that there are people who have interest in keeping your wages lower. We need to find ways to raise them, either through things like raising the floor, or supporting our right to strike action and encouraging people to be in unions, and also democratizing power, particularly in Texas. You've seen what mass privatization has done. It has not created a better product. It has not made it safer. And it's extremely inefficient, and we can do a hell of a lot better and provide cheaper and more affordable electricity to people. But if I were to do that quickly, that's what I would. And our friends at What's Left of Philosophy are saying hello. It's good to see you. People should definitely check out What's Left of Philosophy too. If they have a YouTube channel now, so check them out. They're all good folks over there. I'm trying to follow y'all on Twitch. I'm answering your Twitch questions. I'm just behind. I can't keep up with everything. All right. All right. I'll check out Mario's channel. I appreciate the suggestion there. It doesn't work for me to open it up, but I will see if I can find that for myself later. All right, y'all. It's good to see everybody. I think I gotta run. Tomorrow we'll be hanging out with the guys from This Is Revolution Pod. I can't remember what we have for our bonus episode this week, but do consider subscribing at patreon.com/leftreckoning. Nice to chat with everybody. I've been in a mood, so it's always good to hear from y'all. And I will see y'all tomorrow at 7 Central.